I am Dr. Sarah Rood Walker of the English department at Spelman College. And I have the honor this evening of welcoming everyone on behalf of the Department of English at Spelman and the Lit Week Committee. This is our kickoff event for what we call Lit Week, which has become an annual event at Spelman that celebrates the power of literature and the possibilities of the English major. And we're so glad that our kickoff event tonight has two wonderful writers that we'll be featuring, our very own Wandika Gale and the wonderful Gillian Lee-Fong. So thank you for coming to this event. And I want to say thanks especially to Sharon Strange, who was spearheading the Lit Week organizing, and the other members of the committee, Sequoia Maynor, Wandika Gale, who was featured, and thanks to me. Good, I did some work too. Okay, so welcome to everyone. I am so excited to have the opportunity to introduce my wonderful colleague, Wandika Gale, who joined us recently in the English department faculty. Wandika Gale is a Jamaican writer, visual artist, and assistant professor of creative writing at Spelman College, as you know, who holds a PhD in English and creative writing from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Her writing, both critical and creative, focuses on the rich and varied experiences of the African diaspora, exploring particularly the Afro-Caribbean and African-American migration, the adaptability to place, the preservation of home through custom and memory, and the balance between assimilation and cultural erasure. She has been awarded writing fellowships from Kimbilio Fiction, Callaloo, the Hurston Wright Foundation, and the Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing. In addition to work that has appeared or is forthcoming in The Rumpus, Transition, Interviewing the Caribbean, and other journals, Dr. Gale has recently published her debut collection of short stories, from which she will read tonight, from what I understand, entitled Motherland and Other Stories, which is now available from People Tree Press. The collection, in the words of reviewer Desiree Cooper, is a set of compelling stories that explore the idea of the motherland as the place of existential nourishment and existential threat, especially for women. Writer John McNally calls her a writer to watch, and we're so glad that you're here to witness her and her work in conversation with Dr. Gillian Lee-Fong this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rood Walker, Sarah. That was interesting hearing it like that, so I'm glad. So welcome everyone. I'm really excited that you all could be here. I know that it's unusual that we have to do it virtually, but it's also great because I'm seeing people who live very far away. So welcome to those from Louisiana and in other parts of the country. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Dr. Lee-Fong, and she's going to launch into her reading, and then we will have our discussion. And of course, at the end, you will have an opportunity to ask questions, so you can just make a note of it as we go along as well. So Dr. Gillian Lee-Fong is a Jamaican writer and born to parents of African, Chinese, and Maroon heritage. She draws on her own personal connection to Jamaican culture and the liminal spaces of identity to explore the lasting implications and influences of the Maroons. She writes with a historical precision and lyrical intensity about the complex multicultural heritage of 17th century Jamaican Maroons, an autonomous society of formerly enslaved people who escaped their captors. She has formal studies in creative writing, African studies, and anthropology and psychology, and has worked extensively with refugee, immigrant, and underserved communities, with a specific interest in advocating her empowerment of women and children. She's won awards for her short fiction and her nonfiction, including the Phyllis E. Newman Award, the Langston Hughes Award, the Robert Frost Award, and in the words of Dr. Harcourt Fuller, Associate Professor of History at Georgia State University, her second novel picks up the mantle and maintains the high literary standard bequeathed by previous literary giants in Africa and the African diaspora and in the Caribbean. So welcome, Dr. Lee-Fong. Really happy to meet you, even though we're meeting this way. Seeing if I can see everyone. All right. So before you launch into your reading, I just wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about that journey, about what led you to explore the Maroon culture in fiction. So,
Okay, thank you. And first of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for having me here. I am especially excited because Spelman is also dear to my heart. I don't know if you know, but my daughter is an alum of Spelman College, Dominique Lee-Fong Landry, and she has recently been involved in different activities with Spelman College as well. She's still very close to the college and continues to work with them. I'm also pleased to be here because of the space of women and being able to celebrate women in different areas. Often we are delegated to certain types of fiction or certain types of art, but I feel as if that as women writers and as Caribbean women writers, that we are here celebrating a whole new way of looking at art and literature. And whereas before, this was not often considered literature when it's coming from certain segments of society. Now we can say that we're in a new space, and I really appreciate being here. So I'm sorry I went on, and I need you to repeat your question because I'm not that young.
it's a good thing that you have me speak again, because I forgot to mention that your two novels are Abebi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I've been calling it Abebi in my head this whole time.
That's good.
Tembe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, in those novels, you do explore Maroon culture. It's at the center of your work. So I wondered about that journey. I know that you have a mixed history with it, personal connection, but I wanted to know, why you decided to explore it, how that came about, before you share with us an excerpt of your latest book.
Okay. So first of all, when, it's so funny that, African history has always been very limited, especially of a child of, I'm not, a child of the not so recent past, right? And so, and so even growing up in Jamaica, I was introduced, we were a British colony, that. And so we did not have a lot of history about the Maroons. There was one or two books, but it was sort of more of a myth than a reality. And I was actually working at what is now Georgia Perimeter College, but it's the Clarkston campus of the college. And I was working in the library, and I came across some books on Maroon Society. And I was like, oh my goodness, it is real. It's not just some legend that they talk about. We always hear growing up in Jamaica about Granny Nanny, and she's actually a very famous person, but they always fictionalized her. And I think that's what they tend to do with women heroes. When women are strong, then they fictionalize them, and then they don't become as real to us. And so Nanny was not a real person to me. She was just a story, like an Anansi story or Burr Rabbit story. And so when I came across those books, I became very interested in reading about the history of the Maroons, and I went deep into study on that. I also sort of have a story that is more of a mystical realism story that added to my interest in writing about the Maroons. And that is that I had a dream. And in the dream, I had a gentleman, a very tall gentleman from the past in a long coat and a tall hat, sort of looking like a little bit like Frederick Douglass type person, who was beckoning me down a road. And he led me into this house, a very old house. And in the house was a long table with all these people of African descent sitting around it. And I don't know if you know, but sometimes when you go in Jamaica, this is very, you know, every dream has a meaning. You know, it's not just a dream. It's not just the pizza you ate the night before, you know, there's something significant to it. And so I told my mom about that dream, my mother at the time, and she said, that man sounds like my great uncle so-and-so. And he was a maroon. And so I was like, I am taking this as a sign. I'm going to write this book. And so the first book was really, I was teaching middle school at the time, so it was really a young adult novel. And it is actually being used right now in middle schools in South Texas, where I was working at the time. And they use it a lot as classics. And so a lot of students in South Texas know a lot about the Maroons. Yeah, so that is sort of what led me. It was my interest in just the whole history of it, and and the history also includes a lot of history here in America as well. You know, in South Carolina, in the Louisiana, in Florida, there were Maroon societies there as well. So it was a very relevant story to take on.
That's very interesting, that that idea of dreams and getting sort of the received story that way, and that being such a catalyst for you to then write about it. And your work does offer a lot of those mentions of dreams and their significance in people's lives. So what I'd love for you to do right now is to share some of it with us, and then we can continue our conversation about it.
Okay, so the section that I'm going to read actually is more related to the story. As you know, the Maroons were a runaway slave society. So most of the story is dealing with freed Africans, you know, but I'm going to read the story about because this is like the central part of, and this is the story that is the part of the story that is the catalyst to everything in the Americas. And so I'm going to read a part about the Old Mother, and how Old Mother became ended up in the Blue Mountains as a free Maroon, because she started out, she's the only one who started out in Africa and in slavery. So I'm going to talk about Old Mother. And Old Mother is sort of a representation of every one of our grandmothers, you know, especially, or if it's not your grandmother, it's that, you know, that strange lady down the road who always have something to teach you. And that is what Old Mother is. Okay, so to this section. Okay. All right, the Holy Woman. She was a mystery from day one. Children's talk still buzzed with rumors of who or what she was. Some said she had dropped out of sky into John Crow Mountain, lowered on a golden rope, dangling from a cloud. Some said she was a wandering spirit who came time after time to get a wisdom from the earth. And no one knew how old she was, not even her own self. The guess was somewhere between 77 and 303. But one thing they did know, Old Mother was old. She was the oldest Maroon in the village, older than the widest mesquite tree, older than the longest river. She said her name used to be Yetunde, and that she had forgotten what it meant. When you asked her about her mother and father, she said she never in all her life had any. and that was surely strange. She told how she had been there when the captain was in his mother's belly, and how she had caught him when he came wet and squalling into this world. She knew the history of every Maroon in the village, and even of those who came before them. She remembered when Come If You Dare was no more than a dege handful of ragged enslaved Africans huddled in a dank cave. Yet no one remembered her young. She was always old, always dark and wrinkled like a river bottom, always with a turban upon her head. And as far as anyone knew, she never had neither husband nor child. Old Mother was Old Mother, and the village was her children. When she awoke that morning, Old Mother thought she was back on the slave ship. Eyes still closed, she had felt an undulating motion like a boat moving over water. She opened them cautiously, expecting the darkness, but didn't feel the bodies of the other Africans pressed up against her. And she didn't smell the stench of vomit, nor excrement, nor death. She didn't hear the constant groan of the ship's hull or the moans of souls who just couldn't cry anymore. It came back to her now, that long journey across water that took her from Africa to this small island of the New World. She remembered what it was like, those awakenings. That's what she called them, for she had lost track of whether it was morning or night. There was only the dark and miserable awakenings after blessed sleeps of nothingness. She awoke each time, this is on the slave ship. She awoke each time with a fresh panic in her heart, lips chapped dry by the salt air, her belly cleaved in with hunger, and no knowledge of where her husband and children could be. The woman beside her turned around, eyes white with fear, and jabbering something in an unknown tongue. Old Mother shook her head sadly. The woman was from a different African society. She didn't recognize the markings on her face. She jabbered again, some anxious, desperate query. Old Mother shook her head. It didn't matter what language she spoke. Old Mother did not know the answer to any question she could have asked. Old Mother was known as Miriama then, Yetunde Miriama. Her second name meant gift of God. She was a woman in her mid-20s. She had 4 sons and a young daughter, and a husband who was a good farmer, a family she would probably never see again. I'm going back to the present now. Old Mother shook away the memories and adjusted her eyes to the weak light filtering into the house. The many days of rain had subdued the sun, which glowed feebly through heavy clouds. She had a taste for rose hip tea, its subtle tang on her tongue, its soft blossom smell. Her first mistress had given her some once, an elderly English woman with swirling green eyes and white hair that fluffed up soft on top of her head like the down of a baby duck. Miriama had cared for her 12 years until her death. Then a nephew took over the plantation and life became hell. She thought about Abebi and a weary sadness filled her. It rested upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak and seeped into her bones. She hadn't realized how empty her house would be without her. She hadn't spoken to her since the night of the ceremony. Maybe today she would sneak to the bridal house and bring her some rosehip tea if she found any. Then a cold lump settled in her stomach. Suppose Abebi had run. Maybe she would go to the house and find it empty. She didn't want to tell her, though she knew it was the right thing to do, about the option to leave. Old Molly knew that her reasons were selfish. She didn't want to lose this child. My daughter, she thought. letting the words linger sweetly in her mind. My daughter. She had never allowed herself to think, not after the pain of losing 5 children. When she was brutally taken into slavery, she had hardened her heart to the thought of family, children. She had changed her name so she belonged only to God. She had taken in Abebi and, yes, loved her, but had never allowed herself to think daughter. Daughter was too precious a word. Daughter meant flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. Daughter meant loving someone more than you loved yourself. Old mother allowed herself just for a brief moment to think about what might have happened to the one daughter she had born and left back in Africa. But wasn't it better that she had not been captured with her? Then she closed her mind to that thought and brought it back to the present. If Abebi stays, she said firmly, it will be good. If she leaves, so be it. It will also be good. She thought again of rosehip tea and got up from her bed. Back on the slave ship. The slavers had captured her in the forest as she traveled to visit a sick aunt in a neighboring village. She had not wanted to leave her children, but the rainy season had just ended, and sickness lay hidden in damp pockets of the forest during those times. She didn't want her children to come down with the awful fever that plagued so many, taking their minds before they finally died. She carried a basket on her head with food and certain roots she had collected to help nurse her mother's sister back to health. She came across a pact where a herd of elephants had passed through the forest, destroying branches and leaving deep tracks in the soft earth. She ambled along, carefully placing her own bare feet in the sunken footprints left by the great beasts. She was thinking, this may be my great, 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 great grandfather who came back to visit me. But before the thought had fully flourished, 6 men leaped from the bush and surrounded her. 4 were Africans, but 2 had hair and skin in a pale color that frightened her. Terror entered her breast and lodged there. She dropped her basket and made her long legs take flight. She heard their excited cries as they gave chase. They caught her, bound her hand and feet, and carted her away like a pig to market. They took her to a building, large and white, facing the sea. It was a prison, and she stayed there many days with others that had been captured. Each day she saw more and more Africans being brought to this strange house of stone. They chained them together with iron shackles on their hands and feet. She grew skinny in that house until she was too weak to stand. Only her eyes grew fat as she watched and watched and watched these new things. She saw them bring in strong men, warriors, beautiful women, even children. She saw little girls and boys who should still be with their mothers. She saw chiefs and farmers, servants, merchants, priests, and craftsmen. She didn't see them bring any old ones or sick ones or suckling babies. Those were left to fend for themselves. Every day her eyes darted around, growing plump, portly, even obese with these new things. She also watched for her husband and children, but never saw them. Then one day, a ship appeared, white sails on the great ocean, and she knew she would never see them again. So she changed her name to Miriama, gift of God. She didn't know where the ship was going. Some of the Africans whose language she understood whispered that the white men were demons who were taking them on a long journey to the underworld. There, they would make them their slaves, or as some surmised, their dinner. Miriam knew that was not true. She had looked into their eyes. And even though they came in unexpected colors, she knew they were as much human as she. They placed them in the bottom of the ship, almost 300 of them. They stuffed them there lying side by side, so that wherever she turned, her nose pressed up against the head or hair of the stranger beside her. Somewhere behind her, a woman kept up an incessant wail of why, why, that caused her spine to shiver. And when a young girl close by broke water, she felt the warm urine seep down her side. She lost the sense of time on the slave ship until she couldn't tell how much time had passed. 7 days, 2 moons, 100 years. She only felt herself getting older, very, 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 very old. She could feel the tickle of gray hairs springing up, her teeth shifting in her gums, the lines in her face deepening like dried fruit. So old she was becoming, she could never be young again. One day, the door of the ship's belly creaked open, and sunlight and salty air flowed in. The people writhed like snakes because the light burned their eyes. They were taken up on the deck of the ship, and the sailors splashed them with buckets of seawater. Miriam could hardly stand. Her bones were stiff and frozen into place. Her muscles had forgotten how to walk. She crawled out onto the deck and lay in the sun, its healing warmth pressing down, feeding her bones with its energy, bringing her slowly back to life. When she could, she raised her head to look around. She saw nothing but ocean. It scared her. She tried to stand, all crooked and bent, and craned her neck to see. She lifted her hand to shade her eyes and peered. Her mouth fell open. No land anywhere. Oh, Father, oh, Father. No trees, no grass, no mountains, no animals, no earth to plant millet or build a house upon. Nothing but water as far as her eyes could see. She turned around to see the white men in strange clothes. It was true after all. They were not human. They were really taking them to the underworld. She watched them carefully, saw them laugh and talk. They were lifting stiff, lifeless bodies from below the deck and throwing them into the sea. They pointed and laughed like little children when the sharks came up to eat. Miriam, formerly Yetunde, and soon to be old mother, looked around her. She saw the sad, naked men and women, their bodies black and glistening, their eyes wide and sunken. She saw their bony arms lifted in a quiet plea. She looked again at the white men. She didn't know what to think.
Wow, thank you for sharing that.